I'm a 23-year-old guy who grew up in foster care. My birth parents lost custody when I was about 3 because of severe neglect, as I eventually found out from my caseworker. I tried to reach out a couple of times when I was a teenager just to see if there was something, anything, on their end that wanted to reconnect. All I got was silence. So I moved on with my life, or at least I thought I did. My foster mom, who I call Mom, has been my real family. She gave me the stability and love I never thought I'd get. Through high school, she was there at my sports games, helped me with homework, was just there. I owe her everything. To be honest, I've always held a bit of a grudge against my biological parents, not only for leaving, but for never even checking in all these years. Even with all that, I'm in a good place. I work a decent job, share an apartment with my best friend from high school, and am genuinely content with my life. Then last week, out of nowhere, I got a message on social media from a name I didn't recognize. It was some girl claiming to be my cousin on my biological mother's side. She said she'd been looking for me for years, and that the family missed me. Right off the bat, my guard went up. Missed me? Missed the kid they left in the system to figure things out on his own? I messaged her back cautiously, asking her why she was reaching out now. She said she couldn't explain over messages and wanted to meet. That's when I called my roommate. He's been with me through some tough stuff, so I told him what was happening. His reaction was exactly what I expected, dude. Be careful with this. He pointed out all the red flags, and he's usually right about stuff like this. But a part of me was intrigued. I knew better, but still, some part of me wanted to know. I ended up calling my foster mom to let her know, and her first reaction was just worry. She told me it was okay to ignore them if it brought up too much old hurt, but I could also tell she knew I was curious. So I decided to keep the door open, just a crack, to see where this could lead. I replied to my supposed cousin, asking her what exactly she thought was so important. Her reply was, "There's a lot you don't know, and it's important you hear it." That phrase left me staring at the screen. I didn't know what to think. Was this going to be some wild confession? Or maybe a sob story about why they couldn't keep me? Despite all the warnings from my foster mom and roommate, I found myself asking her where and when she wanted to meet. But then she threw me another curveball. She wanted me to meet everyone, the entire family. To be clear, I didn't even know what everyone meant. I knew nothing about this family. All I'd ever known were brief, vague memories of my biological mother and father. So a family meeting felt like overkill. I told her I'd think about it, but I couldn't stop wondering. Why a big family meeting? Why not just a simple coffee meetup to talk things over? The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became. It just didn't add up. My cousin then insisted that I hear everything at once, saying it was better that way. I'd heard enough. I told her I'd come but made it clear I'd be coming in with a lot of questions. She gave me a time and address, and I left it at that. Before the meeting, I shared everything with my roommate again. He just shook his head and told me, "Man, don't go in expecting anything. In fact, expect nothing and then some." I told him that maybe it was just curiosity, but a part of me wanted closure or something close to it. I guess that's what kept me going through every message exchange. The night before the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'd gone years with no word, no care, no sense that anyone had even bothered to see how I was doing. Now, suddenly my entire birth family is lining up to see me. My foster mom called to check in one last time, making sure I was prepared for whatever I might find out. She reminded me that no matter what they said, my life and happiness didn't depend on them. I could feel her worry, but I could also feel her support. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. I found myself standing outside this address, double-checking if I was in the right place. The house was nicer than anything I'd expected, upscale, like something out of a magazine. Everything about it screamed upper middle class. For a second, I thought I might have walked up to the wrong door. But when my cousin greeted me at the door with a big, rehearsed smile, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She guided me inside, where a mix of unfamiliar faces filled the living room. Some older, some younger, all watching me like I was some unexpected guest at a family reunion. And at the center of it all were my birth parents. They looked at me with what I can only describe as forced smiles, way too eager. It didn't feel natural. There was a quick introduction of names I immediately forgot, and everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen, like I was supposed to react in a certain way. The first words out of my birth mother's mouth were, "Look how much you've grown, baby." It was strange hearing her call me that after so many years of absence. She went in for a hug, but I stepped back, feeling like a stranger in a room full of strangers. My birth father didn't say much, just nodded, as if he were trying to hold back. It was awkward. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, watching my every move, every reaction. Update 1. Walking into that house felt like stepping into another world. It was immaculate and way beyond what I'd imagined. Marble countertops in the kitchen, an enormous chandelier in the entrance. Even the furniture looked straight out of a showroom. Growing up, I'd never seen anything close to this level of comfort or wealth. It made me wonder why I'd been left behind to grow up in foster care, if they had all this. When I stepped into the living room, it was already packed. A mix of older faces I vaguely recognized from some half-buried memory, and a bunch of people I didn't know at all. My birth parents were there, standing at the center, looking at me with these huge, forced smiles, almost like they'd rehearsed their expressions in a mirror. There was a strange silence when I walked in, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do. My birth mom didn't waste any time. She crossed the room and tried to hug me, calling me baby like she'd never missed a day in my life. But it felt wrong, awkward, so I took a step back, keeping the distance. The room got even quieter. I could feel all their eyes on me, tracking my every move. Instead of acknowledging the cold vibe, my mom and dad launched into this weird scripted explanation. They started with the typical apologies you'd expect. They didn't have a choice. Life had been hard. They were young and not ready to take care of a kid. They tossed in a bunch of vague excuses about mental health struggles, financial issues, anything to paint the picture that leaving me behind was their only option. But the way they said it, it felt empty, like they were reading off a script. The weirdest part was watching the rest of the family in the background, especially this one aunt, who kept darting her eyes back and forth between me and my parents. Every time my parents tried to say something sympathetic, my aunt and some of the others would exchange these glances, like there was an inside joke I wasn't part of. The apologies kept going until my mom got teary-eyed and asked for forgiveness. She said, "We were young and made mistakes. Can you forgive us?" It was like she expected that one tear would make me forget years of silence, of not knowing why I'd been left to fend for myself. I didn't say anything, just watched them. The silence stretched on, and it got pretty awkward. Out of nowhere, one of my uncles chimed in, throwing out something about how well the family had done in recent years. That statement hit me hard, considering they'd just been talking about their past financial struggles. Looking around, everyone seemed well off, way beyond what I ever had growing up. It left a bitter taste, wondering how these people could leave me in the system while they apparently found success. As if on cue, I overheard one of the younger cousins whisper to another about keeping everything in the family. They immediately went silent when they noticed I'd heard, but that one line stuck with me. Keeping what in the family, I was still wrapping my head around this new information when I decided I'd had enough and started asking my own questions. I tried to get a straight answer out of them, asking why now, after all this time. Why reach out to me? What was really going on? Every time they'd dodge the question, repeating stuff like, "It's complicated, and there's a lot you need to know." No one actually answered anything. The whole room was tiptoeing around something, and it felt like I was the only one left out. My birth father eventually mentioned something about a family legacy, but he cut himself off before explaining. It was like he'd said too much by accident. They tried to steer the conversation away, back to the rehearsed apologies and vague talk of family unity, but by that point, I was done listening. There was something they weren't telling me, and it was driving me crazy. The whole thing ended with them trying to act like we'd just had this big family bonding moment, but I felt like an outsider. I'd come here hoping for some kind of closure or maybe an explanation, but instead I left with even more questions. They offered a quick, half-hearted goodbye, and I walked out feeling like I'd just been in some strange performance where everyone was playing a part except me. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was way off. I was back in my room, replaying everything over in my head when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin, the one who'd first reached out. She wrote, "There's something big you don't know. We need to talk alone." I stared at the message for a while, not sure if I wanted to open up that can of worms, but if they were keeping something this big from me, I needed to find out what it was. I replied and set up a time to meet her the next day, one-on-one, away from the family's watchful eyes. I updated Reddit, promising I'd be back with more details after the meeting. Right now, I didn't know what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about reconnecting. Something was buried in this family, and I was about to dig it up. Update 2. The next day, I met my cousin at a quiet coffee shop away from the family's neighborhood. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking around nervously. I could tell right away that this wasn't going to be just a casual chat. I sat down, and she got straight to the point, no formalities, no small talk, just a blunt confession that hit me like a ton of bricks. Apparently, a distant relative had passed away recently, leaving behind a massive estate. We're talking serious money, enough to change anyone's life. But there was a catch. For the family to inherit, there was a clause that required all surviving family members to reconnect. I was needed, officially, as part of the family for them to claim it. Without me, they'd lose a big chunk of the inheritance. For a second, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like everything fell into place all at once. The sudden messages, the forced smiles, the weird apologies. All those years of silence and now they wanted me back? It wasn't about family at all. It was about money. She kept going, her voice quieter now, explaining how the whole family was on board with this reunion. They'd been trying to figure out a way to get me back in the fold to satisfy the inheritance requirements. And since I'd grown up in foster care, they had to be extra cautious about how they approached me. According to her, they didn't want to push me away and risk me saying no. It felt surreal sitting there, hearing her talk so openly about it. She said she felt guilty, admitting that the family hadn't really cared about reconnecting with me all these years. But now they were desperate, and I was their only chance to secure the inheritance. She told me that she wanted me to know the truth because she felt bad about how everyone had been handling it. Then she laid out their plan. The family wanted me to agree to rejoin them on paper, at least for the legal part of it. They didn't expect anything beyond that, no obligations, no strings attached. All I had to do was formally accept my place in the family. In return, they'd give me a cut of the inheritance, but only after the estate was processed. I was stunned. The entire reason they'd reached out, every forced smile and every awkward hug, was for a payday, and they hadn't even tried to hide it now that the truth was out. I sat there, not saying a word, just taking it all in. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, waiting for my reaction, but I couldn't give her one. Everything she'd said was spinning in my head, and I needed a minute to process. After a pause, she admitted that she thought I should have the choice to know the truth. She explained how, if I agreed to this, I'd just need to sign a few documents to fulfill the inheritance clause. She tried to sound casual about it, like it was just a minor thing, but it felt anything but minor. I'd spent my life wondering why my family didn't care enough to find me, and now the answer was right there in front of me: money. I didn't say much to her after that. I just nodded, thanked her for meeting with me, and left. I couldn't sit there any longer, listening to her try to dress it up as some noble act of honesty. On the way back, I felt like I was watching my whole life from the outside. None of this was what I'd expected. When I got home, I called my foster mom and explained everything. She listened, only chiming in to let me know she was there. Once I finished, she reminded me that I had a right to protect myself, no matter what they tried to offer. She suggested I speak with a lawyer to understand my options before making any decisions. I could tell she wanted me to be careful, but she didn't try to influence me one way or another. I knew she was right. If they wanted me involved for some legal reason, there had to be more to it. Maybe I could use this situation to my advantage, make sure they didn't just take advantage of me. I started thinking about what a lawyer might say. Would they even have a claim to the money without me? Could I get my own piece of the inheritance and skip the family ties altogether? I had no idea, but I was going to find out. That night, I turned to Reddit for advice. I shared the basics, keeping it anonymous, but detailing how they'd pulled me in with this fake family reunion. People were quick to respond, and most of them encouraged me to go after my birthright without feeling guilty. It was strange, reading their comments and seeing how many others had been through similar things. They told me to get a lawyer and not to let the family manipulate me into signing anything before I knew my rights. I took their advice to heart. The next day, I started searching for a lawyer who specialized in family law and inheritance. It was time to find out exactly what my options were, and whether I could turn this to my advantage. I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them drag me into their plan just because they needed me now. I ended my Reddit post by telling everyone I'd update them soon. I was going to get some professional advice, weigh my options, and then decide what to do. Update 3. I found a lawyer the next day, someone experienced with inheritance and family cases. Sitting in her office, I laid out the story. From my family's sudden attempt to reconnect to the reveal about the inheritance clause. She listened without interrupting, jotting down notes and occasionally nodding as if she'd heard this kind of thing 100 times before. When I finished, she looked up and explained that what the family was asking of me wasn't as simple as it seemed. First, she confirmed that the inheritance was, in fact, substantial. If I could claim a rightful portion, it would be enough to completely change my life. The size of the estate made sense now, why my family was so desperate. But then she explained the real twist, the eligibility clause. Apparently, the relative's will had a stipulation that all estranged family members must fully reintegrate with the family to claim any portion of the estate. That meant it wasn't enough for me just to sign a few papers or attend a family dinner. It required a genuine, documented relationship. And here's where it got tricky. Because I'd been legally adopted out of the family, she said, it could be argued that I wasn't just estranged, I was legally separated. The lawyer told me that my family's attempt to reconnect might not meet the reintegration criteria at all. They'd need to prove a much stronger relationship with me to satisfy the inheritance clause. To get around this, she speculated they might even try to reverse my adoption or find a way to re-adopt me as a legal formality. But that process would be lengthy, messy, and uncertain, especially if I didn't cooperate. Then she gave me a potential way out. Since I had been abandoned and adopted out, I could possibly argue for an independent claim to a portion of the inheritance. The lawyer suggested we could sue directly, using my past trauma and abandonment as grounds. It would bypass the family's plan entirely and potentially guarantee my share. She offered to help me pursue this option if I chose to go down that road. After I left the lawyer's office, my mind was racing. I'd gone in expecting to find a simple answer, but now I had more to consider. Just as I was sorting through it all, there was a knock at my apartment door. I opened it to see my aunt, the one who'd been watching me so closely at the family meeting. She looked anxious and uncomfortable, clearly not thrilled to be here. Without much preamble, she launched into an explanation. The family, she said, saw this inheritance as a new beginning. They'd run into financial trouble, more serious than I'd guessed, and the inheritance was supposed to solve everything. She mentioned debts, some failed business attempts, and how things had gotten worse over the past few years. The house, the lifestyle, they were all a front. If they lost this inheritance, she claimed, the family would collapse financially. Then she shifted the tone, asking me to reconsider any idea of pursuing my own legal route. She insisted that the family's intention to reconnect was genuine, that they wanted me back, and that the inheritance was simply an opportunity to repair the bond they'd lost. She seemed to be struggling, trying to balance sympathy with pressure, and I could feel the manipulation setting in. It was clear they saw me as a lifeline. After she left, I sat with her words, trying to make sense of it all. Everything pointed to one thing: they weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they needed me. The whole story was built on the inheritance clause, and I was the missing piece to their plan. Without me, they'd be stuck, and I was starting to see just how desperate they were. Later that night, as I tried to unwind, my phone buzzed with another message from my cousin. This one was different, more urgent. She wrote, "There's something even bigger you should know before deciding." It felt like there was another layer to this whole thing that no one had told me about yet. I agreed to meet her again, figuring that whatever came next, it would at least give me a clearer picture before I made any decisions. The next morning, I met her at the same coffee shop. She looked around nervously before diving into it. She started talking about the inheritance, but she focused on a specific part of it, something that hadn't come up before. Apparently, there was a long-standing family legacy tied to the estate, and not just in a financial sense. There were some legal conditions in the will, stipulations about keeping the family's assets in trusted hands. This was why they were so insistent on having every family member involved. If I didn't reintegrate, a large portion of the inheritance would be seized or redirected outside the family. This legacy idea wasn't just about money for them, it was a reputation thing, a way of protecting their family's name and standing. And now that I was hearing this, it made sense why they'd kept things so secretive. They didn't just want me back for money, they wanted to preserve this illusion of a close-knit, well-off family. Having an estranged son would complicate that image, especially if he was tied to past neglect and abandonment. I left that second meeting with even more on my mind. The family wanted control, and I was the missing piece that could make or break their plan. But now that I knew their motives, I wasn't sure if I wanted to play along. The lawyer's suggestion to pursue my own claim sounded better by the minute. I posted an update on Reddit to let everyone know where things stood. I told them about the meeting with the lawyer, the family's secret financial issues, and my cousin's warning about the family legacy. The responses poured in, most people urging me to go after what I deserved and not let them manipulate me. Many shared their own stories of families using people for personal gain, which only solidified my choice. In the post, I told Reddit that I was considering all my options but felt like I'd only scratched the surface of my family's secrets. I was ready to dig deeper, even if it meant breaking the image they'd spent years creating. If they thought they could control me with a few forced smiles and apologies, they were about to find out I wasn't the naive kid they'd left behind. Update 4. I met my cousin again in the same coffee shop, though this time, her energy was way different, nervous, almost like she was debating whether to tell me something or keep it hidden. She didn't waste time once we sat down, launching straight into an explanation that unfolded a whole new side of my family I hadn't imagined. It turns out that my parents, back when I was still a toddler, were deep into some shady financial dealings. My cousin described it as creative accounting, but as she kept talking, the details became clearer. They were laundering money, funneling it through small businesses and fake accounts. They'd managed to keep it hidden for a while, but as the scheme got bigger, it drew attention. Eventually, government investigators started circling, and things were on the verge of blowing up. I learned that my sudden removal from my birth parents wasn't just due to neglect. As they'd always claimed, it was a strategic decision made by the family to distance me from their issues and make themselves look more sympathetic. They thought that if they gave me up, it would paint a picture of responsible, misunderstood people who had just fallen on hard times. This sympathetic angle, my cousin explained, was supposed to make them look like victims instead of suspects. I just sat there listening as she laid out how my family's financial struggles had spiraled into a full-blown money laundering scandal. The authorities had seized a ton of assets back then, draining everything they had and leaving them on the edge of ruin. Some of my relatives even faced potential jail time, though they somehow managed to avoid it through settlements and quiet deals. The cousin pointed out that this period was when the family really began to fracture, everyone trying to cover their tracks while pretending to be innocent. She looked around nervously before continuing, telling me that the reason my family was reaching out now wasn't just about the inheritance. They were terrified that reconnecting with me might backfire, but they needed to meet the inheritance clause if they were going to keep their heads above water. If I exposed anything from that period, if I even hinted at what I now knew, the family's reputation would be ruined, and any chance at getting the inheritance would vanish. The inheritance was their last shot to secure financial stability after years of barely scraping by and keeping up appearances. And then she laid out their offer. They wanted me to agree to rejoin the family formally, but with one condition: I had to keep quiet about everything I'd just learned. If I played along, they'd make sure I got a cut of the inheritance, no questions asked. It was a deal, plain and simple. But it was clear as day what they were asking me to do: cover for them, pretend I was happy to be back in the family fold, and in return I'd get a share. No family reunion, no real apologies, just business. As I left the coffee shop, my mind was buzzing. The pieces were all falling into place, and I could see how they'd manipulated every part of this reconnection attempt. My family wasn't just desperate for the inheritance, they were desperate to keep their skeletons in the closet. I headed straight home and jumped back onto Reddit, updating everyone on what I'd just found out. People in the comments were furious for me, some even sharing similar experiences, telling me not to trust a single word from my family and to go for the inheritance independently if I could. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was my birth father, and he sounded furious. He'd obviously caught wind of my potential plans to go solo with the inheritance. He didn't hold back, demanding I drop the act and fall in line. He claimed I owed the family for the life they'd sacrificed and for the suffering they'd endured to protect me. It was a wild attempt at emotional blackmail, trying to paint himself as a hero for abandoning me in foster care. The whole thing was surreal, like he actually believed I'd buy into his twisted version of events. His words just fueled my resentment, and I hung up without saying much. This wasn't family, it was just a bunch of people trying to use me one last time. I knew I needed to find out more about who I really was and where I came from, outside of this mess they'd created. I started digging into my roots, checking records, seeing what I could uncover about my biological history that wasn't tied up in my parents' lies. That's when I got a message from someone who claimed to be an old friend of my birth mother. She'd heard through a mutual contact that I was looking for information, and she wanted to clear the air about the family's past. I agreed to meet her, hoping this would give me some insight that wasn't tainted by the family's need for secrecy. I updated Reddit again, sharing this new twist and letting everyone know that I'd be meeting with this friend soon. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive, urging me to dig up the truth whatever it might be. If there was any chance to find real answers, answers that didn't come with strings attached, it was through someone outside the family's circle. This was no longer just about the inheritance or keeping my family's secrets. It was about finding the truth, about who I was before they decided to erase me from their lives for their own benefit. As I wrapped up my post, I promised to share whatever I found with everyone following along, good or bad. If my family thought they could keep me quiet with a payoff, they were about to realize just how wrong they were. Update 5. I met with my birth mother's old friend in a small cafe on the other side of town. She looked to be in her 50s, with an air of someone who had seen a lot but wasn't easily rattled. After we settled down, she leaned in, ready to tell me the truth my family had worked so hard to hide. She started with a heavy sigh, explaining how my parents and extended family had always been obsessed with money, power, and appearances. In their world, everything was about maintaining the illusion of success. When I was born, the family was already juggling shady financial dealings. My mother and father were part of a money laundering operation they'd joined through some of my dad's associates, people who didn't hesitate to pull strings and dodge the law. When it started drawing attention, they had to make choices. According to her, I was viewed as collateral damage, not a child, not family, just a legal liability. They feared that if authorities began investigating, they'd look more sympathetic by distancing themselves from me. They thought if they sent me into foster care, it would protect them from scrutiny and create a buffer between me and their mess. I was essentially sacrificed to help them avoid legal trouble. The friend shook her head, disgust clear on her face as she continued. She said they had the means to care for me, but their priorities were always self-preservation and money. Keeping me would have been a risk to their carefully constructed image. I was abandoned, not because they couldn't take care of me, but because it was easier to let the system handle it while they continued with their schemes. Hearing all of this left no doubt in my mind that I was nothing but a pawn to them. And now, decades later, the inheritance was just another way for them to dodge financial ruin. They'd lost their fortunes over the years, and this inheritance was their only shot at avoiding total collapse. After that meeting, I went straight to my lawyer. I laid out everything the friend had told me, the whole twisted story of how I'd been abandoned to protect their reputation. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I filled her in, and when I was finished, she assured me this information could actually work to my advantage. Since I was legally abandoned, I had grounds for an independent claim on the inheritance. I didn't need to fulfill their reconnection clause. I had a separate claim due to their abandonment, and it could hold up in court. That afternoon, I made my decision. I reached out to my family and let them know directly. I wasn't going along with their plan, and I knew the full story. I made it clear I intended to pursue my share independently, and I wasn't interested in playing by their rules anymore. The response was swift and intense. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with messages. My birth father sent one furious message after another, accusing me of tearing the family apart, calling me ungrateful, and demanding I drop this ridiculous act. An aunt chimed in too, ranting that I was selfish for going after the inheritance when it could save the family. It was pure chaos, and they threw every insult they could think of my way, as if that would guilt me into backing down. I ignored most of it, but I made sure to set clear boundaries. I told them I'd continue contact only if it was on my terms and with full transparency. No more hiding behind vague excuses or secret agendas. They wanted me to be part of the family? Fine, but it would be on my terms. Then the legal threats started. They claimed they'd take me to court if I tried to steal what they believed was theirs. But my lawyer was ready. She assured me that we had a solid case and that my legal standing was strong. She wasted no time, filing a formal claim for my share of the inheritance. Our argument was simple. They'd abandoned me, and I had every right to a part of the estate without needing to satisfy their reconnection clause. I updated Reddit again, and the support I received was overwhelming. People shared their own stories, others offered legal advice, and everyone encouraged me to keep fighting. Some users even shared stories of families who had manipulated them or used them as pawns, telling me to stand firm and not let my family use me again. The case gained momentum quickly. With my lawyer pushing my claim forward, it became clear that my family didn't have a choice but to respond legally. They couldn't bully me out of it, and they couldn't scare me off. Eventually, my birth parents reached out directly, asking me to settle outside of court. They wanted me to be reasonable and claimed it was for the good of everyone, but I wasn't interested. I had no reason to settle, not after learning what they'd done and how little regard they'd had for me as a child. This wasn't about revenge, it was about finally standing up for myself. I let them know that I was committed to seeing this through. The Reddit community was right there with me, cheering me on, praising me for finally breaking free of their control. After all the years of feeling like I was unwanted, I finally had a chance to reclaim some part of my life. The encouragement was overwhelming, and for the first time, I felt empowered to create my own path, free from the twisted history my birth family had left behind. I finished my update by thanking everyone for their support, expressing my gratitude, and promising that whatever happened, I'd be using any inheritance I received to build a new life, one where I didn't have to rely on anyone but myself. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I recently decided to do something that in hindsight I should have known would go sideways, organizing a big family reunion. It had been years since we'd all been in the same place at the same time. The last real gathering was probably my grandfather's funeral, and even then, half the family wasn't speaking to the other half. Still, I thought enough time had passed that we could put old issues aside and just enjoy a weekend together. Turns out, I was very, very wrong. I went all out on planning. I found a perfect location, a beautiful lodge in a national park with plenty of space, hiking trails, a lake nearby, and a big fire pit for barbecues. I even got a group rate and started planning activities, including a slideshow of old family pictures, some fun games for the kids, and just an overall chance to reconnect. I sent out invites to everyone, my parents, my siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, basically the whole extended family. Most people seemed excited. Some even offered to help, and I genuinely thought it was going to be a great time. Then there was my cousin Sarah. She's 35, a little older than me, and has always had a weird attitude when it comes to family events. When I first reached out, her response was off. Instead of the usual, "Oh, that sounds fun," she just said, "Are you sure people actually want to come?" It was such an odd reaction that I brushed it off at first. She said she'd think about it, which already set the tone that she wasn't enthusiastic. But whatever, not everyone has to be excited. Over the next few weeks, I kept the momentum going in a group chat. I posted pictures of the lodge, updates about food plans, and a few throwback photos to build nostalgia. Most people were engaging, but Sarah started dropping in weird little comments here and there. Stuff like, "This is a big effort. I just hope no one gets left out." Or "Family dynamics can be tricky. Hope you've considered everything." Nothing outright negative, but just enough to make it seem like she was waiting for something to go wrong. And at first, a few relatives had understandable conflicts. A work shift change, a minor illness. But when more people dropped out, I started noticing something strange. My parents, once excited about the event, suddenly hesitated. When I asked why, they seemed uneasy. "It's just, things feel complicated right now," my mom said. I could tell they weren't fully convinced by whatever had been said, but they were still keeping their distance. When I asked why, my mom got weirdly hesitant and said, "We just don't want to take sides." Sides? What sides? I tried reaching out to individual family members to see if something had happened, but everyone was either dodging the question or giving me surface-level responses. It was frustrating, but I still figured some people would show up. The RSVP list had dwindled, but I was still expecting at least a decent turnout. The day of the reunion arrived, and my wife and I packed up the car with our kids, ready for a fun weekend. We got to the lodge early to set up, putting out food, organizing the barbecue, getting everything ready. And then we waited. And waited. Hours passed and the place was still empty. I checked my phone and saw a flood of last-minute cancellations. Some were vague, saying, "Something came up," while others didn't even bother to respond. I kept thinking maybe a few would show up late. Maybe they got held up in traffic, or were just running behind. But no one came. Well, almost no one. My uncle arrived later in the evening, looking uncomfortable. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and muttered, "I wanted to come, but, you know the situation." No, I absolutely did not know the situation. I pressed him for details, but all he'd say was, "It's just a lot of talk going around. People didn't want to get involved." That's all he'd give me. He didn't stay long either, just had a quick drink, ate a little, and left, saying he hoped things would blow over. Blow over? Blow over from what? At this point, I knew someone had been stirring up drama, and my first guess was Sarah. But I still had no idea what she could have possibly said that made nearly my entire family bail on an event they were originally excited about. I wasn't getting answers from anyone, and at that moment I was too exhausted and frustrated to keep chasing them. Then, late that night, I got a message from my cousin Anna. She apologized for not coming and said she felt bad about how everything went down. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. I didn't believe what Sarah said, but I didn't want to cause drama. That was it. No context. No explanation, just confirmation that Sarah had spread something that turned everyone against me. I responded immediately, asking what exactly Sarah had said. Anna left me on read, and that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a few family members flaking on an event. This was something bigger, something personal, and Sarah was right in the middle of it. The morning after the failed reunion, I started making calls. First on the list were my parents. They had been supportive at first, but suddenly backed out with no real explanation. My mom picked up, and as soon as I asked why they didn't come, there was hesitation. She danced around the topic, saying things like, "It was complicated, and we didn't want to be in the middle of things." I pressed harder. Finally, she let something slip. Sarah told people something upsetting. That was the first real confirmation. I asked what exactly Sarah had said, but my mom clammed up. She just kept repeating that people were uncomfortable, and that she didn't want to get involved in family drama. When I pushed further, she just sighed and said, "It's not my place to say." That was as much as I was getting from her. I hung up, and immediately texted Sarah. She didn't reply at first, but a few minutes later, I got a vague, smug response. "I thought you'd realize by now why people are upset." No actual answer. Just her playing games. I tried reaching out to my cousins next, but it was the same pattern. Some ignored my messages completely. Others gave vague responses like, "I don't want to get involved," or "This whole thing got out of hand." No one was giving me anything solid, which only confirmed that whatever Sarah had spread was bad enough to make people distance themselves. The only person willing to talk was my uncle, the one person who had actually shown up at the lodge. I called him, and this time, he didn't dance around it. Sarah had told everyone that I planned the reunion as part of some scheme to manipulate the family about my grandfather's inheritance. I almost dropped my phone when I heard that. It didn't even make sense. My grandfather had passed away a year ago, and his estate had been settled months before I even started planning the reunion. But according to Sarah, I was supposedly trying to butter up the family, make myself look good, and gain favor with key relatives for some kind of financial advantage. And people believed her. Sarah knew how to push the right buttons. She didn't outright accuse me. She just asked leading questions. Isn't it weird OP planned this so suddenly? Or wouldn't it make sense if he was trying to look good for certain people? At first, some relatives shrugged it off. But others, already holding old grudges, started putting the pieces together in the way she wanted them to. She brought up old childhood stories, making it seem like I had always been the golden boy while she was the overlooked cousin. She played into whatever old resentments people already had and made it sound like I had some hidden agenda. I immediately called her. She actually picked up this time, and before I could even get a full sentence out, she just laughed. Not nervous laughter, just pure arrogance. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just said, "Well, you always were the favorite." People put two and two together. I hung up. There was no point arguing with someone who enjoyed stirring the pot this much. At this point, I was done playing defense. I sent a group message to everyone who had originally planned to come to the reunion. I laid everything out in clear terms. The reunion had nothing to do with inheritance or money. My grandfather's estate had already been finalized before I even planned it. I had never once spoken to anyone about inheritance, nor had I ever asked for anything from anyone. I told them exactly what Sarah had said and how she had twisted the situation. I made it clear that I had tried to bring the family together and that Sarah had spread lies to tear it apart. Responses started coming in. Some people admitted Sarah had exaggerated, but there were still a few who said things like, asterisk, you have to understand how this looked. Others tried to stay neutral, saying they didn't want to take sides. Sarah, she doubled down. Instead of apologizing, she sent me a direct message. If people didn't trust you, maybe that's something you should reflect on. That was it. No remorse. Just her twisting the knife even deeper. At this point, my wife stepped in. She had been watching me stress over this for days, and she finally told me what I needed to hear. You're wasting your time trying to convince people who don't want to listen. She was right. The people who wanted to believe Sarah would believe her. No matter what I said, the ones who actually cared about the truth had already reached out. A couple of younger cousins messaged me privately. They felt bad for believing Sarah's lies and wanted to make it up to me. They admitted she had been feeding them nonsense for weeks, but they hadn't realized how far she'd taken it. That was the only silver lining. I took a step back and looked at the bigger picture. The damage was done. Sarah had successfully poisoned enough minds to ruin the reunion. She had made sure people stayed away, and now she was acting like I was the one with something to prove. So I had a choice to make: let this go or push back even harder. Because at this point, exposing her lies wasn't just about clearing my name, it was about making sure she didn't get away with it. I had given Sarah enough time to fix this mess herself, and she clearly had no intention of doing that. So I decided to force the issue. I set up a family Zoom meeting and invited anyone who wanted to hear the truth. No more vague group chat arguments, no more passive-aggressive messages. I was going to lay everything out in front of everyone at once. At first, the responses were hesitant. Some people ignored the invite completely. Others responded with the usual "I don't want to be involved in drama" excuses. But enough people showed interest that I knew it was worth doing. My parents joined, along with a few cousins, my uncle who had actually shown up to the reunion, and some aunts. Sarah, however, didn't respond at all. I sent her a direct message. No hostility, just a simple, "Hey, if you have nothing to hide, you should be there." A few minutes later, she replied with, "I'm too busy, but I hope you get whatever you need from this." I wasn't letting her dodge it that easily. I sent another message. "Everyone's expecting you. If you don't show up, it'll say a lot." 15 minutes before the call, Sarah finally joined. Her camera was off at first, but when she did turn it on, she had that fake forced smile she always used when she was pretending everything was fine. She started with small talk, acting like the whole situation was just some minor misunderstanding. I wasn't playing along. I started right away, laying out the facts. I explained the timeline, how I planned the reunion months after my grandfather's estate had already been settled. I pointed out that I had never asked anyone for anything financially. I told them about the texts and the conversations I'd had where people admitted that Sarah had been the one pushing the idea that I had some hidden agenda. Sarah listened, occasionally shaking her head or rolling her eyes, but when I presented the screenshots, she sat still. At first, she tried playing it off. I was just repeating what others said. But some family members weren't buying it. My uncle frowned. "But you were the one who started saying it in the first place, weren't you?" Another cousin hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, Sarah was the first to bring it up." That was when she started losing control. Not instantly, but gradually, as people began realizing they had been played. She claimed she was just concerned about how things looked, and that other people had come to her with suspicions. She was only passing along information. She tried to flip it, making it seem like she had been trying to protect the family from unnecessary drama. That's when I shared the screenshots. I had them ready, messages she had sent to multiple people outright saying, "OP is just trying to get in good with the family for financial reasons. No concern, no passing along rumors." Just her own words, clear as day. At first there was silence. Then, a few people spoke up. Some still hesitant. I mean, we all had questions. One cousin said. Another muttered, "I didn't think it was that serious." Not everyone immediately turned against Sarah, but the doubt had started creeping in. But of course, there were still the ones who tried to stay neutral, claiming she had just made an assumption and didn't mean for it to go this far. That's when something unexpected happened. Sarah's own mother spoke up. She didn't defend Sarah. Instead, she sighed and said something that made the entire call go silent. "She does this. She always does this." Sarah's face went pale. Her mom kept going, explaining that this wasn't the first time Sarah had twisted the truth to make herself look like a victim. She had a history of manipulating situations, especially when she felt like someone else was getting attention. She had done it in high school, at family events, even in her own friendships. It was a pattern. Sarah panicked. She immediately tried to flip the script, bringing up a completely unrelated event from years ago. Something about me supposedly being selfish at a different family gathering, trying to make it seem like I was the problem. I shut it down fast. "This is about the reunion. This is about you lying to turn people against me. Stay on topic." She tried again, but by then the damage was done. Her usual tricks weren't working. One of her closest allies, one of the cousins who had originally believed her, admitted that she had doubts but went along with it, because everyone else seemed to be doing the same. Sarah suddenly lost connection and dropped from the call. A few minutes later, she sent a message in the cousin group chat. "I'm not going to sit there and be attacked. If people want to believe the worst about me, that's on them." Then she left the chat. After the Zoom call ended, things started shifting. Some relatives messaged me privately to apologize. Others still refused to pick a side, saying it was all just a misunderstanding. But Sarah wasn't done. Within an hour, she posted a long, passive-aggressive Facebook status about how some people love to twist stories to make themselves look good. She didn't name names, but it was obvious who she was talking about. A few of her usual supporters commented things like "stay strong," and some people just love drama. I didn't respond. There was no point. The people who knew the truth knew the truth. I started thinking about something else, something my wife had suggested before all this. A second, smaller reunion, one without the people who turned their backs on me, one where the people who actually cared about family could come together without the toxicity. Maybe it was time to start focusing on the people who actually mattered. After the Zoom call, the family split into two clear groups: those who fully saw through Sarah's lies, and those who either still supported her or were trying to stay neutral. There was no middle ground anymore. Some cousins who had originally ghosted me suddenly started reaching out, saying things like "I should have asked for your side first," or "I didn't realize how much Sarah twisted things." Others doubled down, insisting this has gone too far, and Sarah didn't mean any harm. The cousin group chat, which had once been a place for planning meetups and sharing family updates, turned into a disaster. People were arguing, calling each other out, and debating whether Sarah had been misunderstood or if she had knowingly sabotaged the reunion. Sarah stayed silent at first, but then, in typical dramatic fashion, she left the chat with a vague exit message about how some people love to gang up on others to feel better about themselves. That should have been the end of it. But Sarah wasn't done. Instead of apologizing or letting it blow over, she started spreading a new narrative. This time, she framed herself as the real victim. She started telling people I humiliated her in the Zoom call, that I had turned the family against her over a simple misunderstanding, and that I had overreacted because I was too sensitive. She didn't deny making comments about me and the inheritance, but she twisted it, saying she was just repeating things other people were already saying, and I blew it out of proportion. Then came the Facebook posts. Sarah has always been the type to post vague, passive-aggressive things online instead of confronting people directly. It started with funny how some people will sell out their own blood for attention, followed by, "You think you know someone, but they'll throw you under the bus the first chance they get." She didn't name names, but it was obvious who she was talking about. Some of her usual supporters commented with things like "stay strong," and "you don't need fake people in your life." Even with all the evidence stacked against her, Sarah still had people blindly defending her. My parents, unfortunately, were part of the "let's just move on" camp. They kept telling me to let it go and not make this a bigger deal than it already is. They didn't outright defend Sarah, but they also refused to take a real stand. My mom especially kept saying, "Family is family. Do you really want this to go on forever?" Meanwhile, my Aunt Sarah's own mother finally had enough. She called me privately and admitted something that completely changed the way I saw the situation. Sarah's jealousy didn't start with the reunion. It had been brewing for years. According to her, Sarah had always had a complex about being overlooked. She felt like she was constantly in the background while other family members, especially me, were seen as more responsible or more successful. The reunion, in her mind, was just another example of me playing host and being the center of attention, and she couldn't handle it. So instead of just not attending, she created chaos to make sure I wouldn't succeed in bringing the family together. And the inheritance lie, completely baseless. My aunt confirmed what I already knew. The estate had been settled long before I ever started planning the reunion. Sarah had pulled that out of thin air, just to turn people against me. At this point, I was done with the passive-aggressive posts, the fake victim act, and the constant shifting of blame. I sent Sarah one final message, giving her one last chance to own up to what she had done. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she responded, "You always needed to be the center of attention. I just made sure people saw the real you." That was it. I blocked her. I realized she was never going to admit what she did, and I was wasting my time trying to get her to take responsibility. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't going to fix anything. She was only concerned about controlling the narrative. The best way to get back at her, move forward without her. That's when I decided to organize a second, smaller reunion. Some of my cousins who had originally backed out felt guilty and wanted to make it up to me. They suggested we do another get-together, this time without Sarah or anyone who had fueled her drama. It wasn't going to be a huge event like before, just a gathering of the people who actually cared about keeping the family together. Of course, Sarah caught wind of it. She started privately messaging family members, warning them that I was trying to turn people against her and making the family choose sides. At this point, though, most people had caught on to her manipulation. Even a few of her past supporters were starting to distance themselves. Some mutual friends in the family also reached out, telling me they had already started cutting Sarah off over her behavior. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she had pulled something like this, just the first time she had done it on a big enough scale for people to notice. My wife made one thing clear: I had already won. Sarah's lies had backfired, her reputation was in shambles, and now, she was scrambling to do damage control. So I stopped engaging. I stopped responding to her posts, her messages, her attempts to bait me back into the drama. Instead, I focused on planning the new reunion, the one she wouldn't be a part of. Once Sarah realized I wasn't taking the bait anymore, she switched tactics. She started telling people she was being bullied, that I was turning the family against her and making her a scapegoat for one little mistake. She painted herself as the victim, saying she had tried to apologize, but was being shut out and unfairly blamed. Then came the guilt tripping from the usual crowd. A few relatives who had stayed neutral started reaching out, saying Sarah was really upset and that she had made a mistake but was being treated too harshly. Some even suggested that I should be the bigger person and apologize first to help smooth things over. I didn't budge. I made it clear: Sarah wasn't getting an apology from me. She had spread lies, turned people against me, and refused to take responsibility. If she actually wanted to fix things, she would own up to it, not shift the blame onto me. And then, right on cue, another family member sent me an anonymous heads up. Sarah was spreading a new rumor. Apparently, she was telling people that I was planning to exclude certain family members from future gatherings as revenge. She made it sound like I was creating some kind of divide in the family by only inviting my side and shutting out the people who had believed her lies. It didn't take long for her meltdown to happen. One afternoon, the cousin group chat, already half abandoned after the last disaster, suddenly lit up. Sarah had rejoined. She immediately started typing out a long, dramatic message about how certain people were holding grudges and refusing to move on over a misunderstanding. She went on about how some people love tearing families apart instead of fixing things. She expected sympathy. She didn't get it. A few cousins finally had enough. They called her out, saying that she wasn't being attacked for a mistake. She had deliberately lied and doubled down when she got caught. They pointed out that she had never actually apologized, just played the victim every time she lost control of the narrative. Sarah didn't like that. She immediately left the group chat again. That should have been the end of it, but then something unexpected happened. I got a message from my uncle, the one who had originally believed Sarah's lies. He admitted that he had been wrong, that he had let Sarah's words sway him, and that he regretted not seeing through it sooner. He wanted to make amends and even offered to help organize the new reunion to show his support. Meanwhile, Sarah made one last attempt to make peace. She sent me a message saying she was willing to move past everything if I admitted that we both played a role in the drama. I ignored it. By then, plans for the second reunion were already in motion. It was a much smaller gathering, only the people who actually wanted to be there. No unnecessary drama, no passive-aggressive comments, just family members who actually cared about spending time together. Then, right before the event, Sarah found out about it. She casually messaged me, acting like nothing had happened, asking if she was invited. I responded with one sentence: "I thought you wouldn't be comfortable attending since you assumed I had an agenda." She didn't reply. Instead, she switched back to damage control mode. My cousin Anna told me Sarah was now pretending to be completely unbothered online, making posts about how family is everything and how drama isn't worth it. She was trying to rewrite history, acting like she had chosen to step back from family drama when, in reality, she had been cut out. By this point, most of the family had settled into their positions. Some had completely distanced themselves from Sarah, realizing how manipulative she had been. Others still pretended nothing happened and tried to act like both sides had been equally at fault. Either way, no one was openly defending her anymore. The reunion itself? Perfect. For the first time in years, a family gathering actually felt like a family gathering. No tension, no whispering, no side-eyeing across the room, just good food, good company, and actual fun. The people who came were the ones who wanted to be there. and that made all the difference. As the night wrapped up, I realized something. I didn't miss Sarah. I didn't miss the negativity, the passive-aggressive comments, or the constant manipulation. Cutting her out hadn't just protected me, it had made everything better, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt completely free from the drama she had tried to create. Just when it seemed like everything had finally settled, Sarah made one last, desperate attempt to rewrite history. One afternoon, a cousin sent me a message with a link to Sarah's latest stunt, a Facebook video she had posted. I clicked the link, and there she was, sitting in front of a window with soft lighting, speaking in a calm, reflective voice like she was recording some kind of self-help speech. She went on for 5 whole minutes about forgiveness, growth, and learning to move on from betrayal. She talked about how sometimes the people you trust the most will turn on you, but the only way forward is to be the bigger person. She never mentioned my name, but it was clear she was painting herself as the victim who had been wronged by toxic family members. The comments started rolling in. At first, she got some support. A few distant relatives and friends who didn't know the full story commented things like, "Proud of you for taking the high road, and it's so important to let go of negativity." But then, the actual family members, the ones who knew what had really happened, started pushing back. One relative simply asked, "But weren't you the one who spread lies about OP?" Another cousin commented, "Wait, didn't you refuse to apologize when you got caught?" Someone else chimed in with, "Being the bigger person usually means taking responsibility first." The support she was expecting quickly turned into damage control mode. Sarah tried to respond to a few comments, saying things like, "There are 2 sides to every story and I don't want to dwell on the past." But it wasn't working. More and more people started calling her out, questioning why she was still playing the victim when everyone knew the truth. For weeks, I had ignored her social media nonsense, but this time I commented for the first time. Just one sentence. "If you're really the bigger person, why did you lie in the first place?" That was all I needed to say. Within hours, Sarah deleted the video. Just like that, her attempt at public manipulation had completely backfired. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah's mom. She started by saying Sarah was really upset and felt like she lost control of the family narrative. She wasn't calling to defend her. She was calling because Sarah was spiraling. Then she told me something I hadn't heard before. Sarah's obsession with trying to tear me down wasn't just about the reunion, it was about something much bigger. She had always been insecure about her place in the family, feeling like she was constantly overshadowed by me. Even as kids, she had felt like I was seen as the responsible one while she was treated like an afterthought. In her mind, this whole mess had been her way of leveling the playing field. That's why she doubled down instead of apologizing. That's why she kept trying to control the narrative even after the truth came out. She hadn't just lied for the sake of drama. She had lied because she thought she was finally getting back at me for years of imagined slights. After that call, Sarah disappeared from social media. Her Facebook and Instagram were gone. No more vague, dramatic posts. No more bigger person speeches. No more playing the victim. It was like she had finally realized there was nothing left to salvage. And just like that, everything felt normal again. Family gatherings stopped feeling like battlegrounds. There was no tension, no whispered side conversations about drama, no worrying about who was taking sides. People actually relaxed around each other again. I noticed that without Sarah stirring the pot, things just felt easier. No one was tiptoeing around fake drama. No one was trying to mediate a situation that never should have happened in the first place. Looking back, I realized how much time and energy I had wasted trying to get Sarah to admit the truth. She never would have. Some people never take accountability because admitting they were wrong would hurt their ego more than losing relationships. Sarah's reputation, permanently damaged. Even though she was silent now, people weren't forgetting what she had done. The trust she destroyed wasn't coming back. Some relatives who had initially defended her had fully distanced themselves, realizing she had manipulated them. Even the ones who tried to stay neutral weren't rushing to patch things up. Months passed and life moved on. Then out of nowhere, I got a text from an unknown number, "Hope you're doing well." No name, no context. Just those 4 words. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. I didn't reply. That was the perfect ending. Some people will never change. Some people will always try to rewrite the past to make themselves look better. The best way to handle them isn't to argue, fight, or demand an apology. The best way to win, move on completely. After Sarah disappeared from social media, things went quiet. For a while, no more vague posts, no more passive-aggressive digs, and no more dramatic speeches about forgiveness and betrayal. It was as if she had erased herself from the family's online space. But even though she wasn't posting anymore, the rumors didn't stop. I started hearing from relatives that Sarah was still privately complaining about how everyone turned against her and how she was the real victim in all of this. She wasn't going to admit what she had done. Instead, she was shifting the blame onto the family for abandoning her. She was telling people that I had manipulated everyone, that I had blown everything out of proportion, and that all she had done was ask a simple question about the inheritance. A few relatives still gave her the benefit of the doubt. They weren't necessarily defending her, but they'd say things like, maybe she just made a mistake, or maybe she didn't realize how bad it got. The usual let's just move on crowd. Then, a cousin who had originally sided with Sarah dropped a bombshell. Apparently, Sarah had lost friends over this whole ordeal. She had vented to some of her non-family friends, probably expecting sympathy. But once they heard the full story, including the fact that she had completely fabricated the inheritance lie, some of them started distancing themselves. They didn't want to be associated with someone who would go to such lengths to destroy a family gathering just because of jealousy. Then came another twist. Sarah's career took a hit. I found out through mutuals that she had been up for a job that required strong references. She had applied to a company where, by pure coincidence, the hiring manager knew about the family drama. That manager, one of our distant relatives. Months later, I heard through a cousin that Sarah had applied for a new job. It turned out one of the hiring managers was distantly connected to our family. When they asked a mutual acquaintance about her, they got an awkward silence in response. No direct bad-mouthing, just hesitation. And sometimes, hesitation speaks louder than words. I never would have known about this if it weren't for a cousin who overheard the whole thing. And to be clear, I had nothing to do with it. Sarah had burned so many bridges on her own that her actions were catching up to her. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah's mom tried to mediate. She reached out to me and asked if I could just talk to Sarah one last time to smooth things over. I wasn't interested. I told her, I don't need an apology anymore. I just need to not have her in my life. That was it. That was the final word. Meanwhile, my smaller reunions had started turning into a tradition. Every year we got together, the people who actually wanted to be there. The ones who didn't bring drama, the ones who valued family without all the manipulation. And it was better than ever. No tension, no forced smiles, no wondering who was secretly spreading lies behind the scenes. At first, people still awkwardly asked about Sarah. Is she coming this year, or have you talked to her? But over time the questions stopped. It became clear that no one really missed her presence. Then, months later, I got a new message from an unknown number. I just wanted to know if we can start fresh. Sarah, I didn't reply. I knew exactly what this was. Another attempt for her to control the narrative. She wasn't reaching out because she had changed. She wasn't reaching out to admit fault. She was reaching out because she had lost control. Some of the family members who had stayed neutral started reaching out too. They admitted they regretted not standing up to Sarah sooner. Some even apologized for keeping their distance during the worst of it, realizing they had been fooled by her manipulations. The difference now, it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't holding on to any of it. I wasn't looking for revenge. I had already won. With Sarah out of the picture, my life was better. I was happier, more productive, and more at peace than I had been in a long time. Then, one of my old high school friends mentioned something interesting. Sarah had randomly messaged them to catch up. It was obvious what she was doing. She wasn't just reaching out to me, she was looking for allies. Maybe she thought she could build a new circle of people who didn't know what had happened. Maybe she thought she could rewrite history somewhere else. But it didn't matter. Sarah was gone from my life, and for the first time in years the family felt whole again. A year had passed since the family reunion disaster, and for the most part life had moved on. The family was closer than ever. The smaller reunions had become a tradition, and the group chat, now Sarah free, was actually active and positive again. No more drama, no more tension. And then, out of nowhere, Sarah reappeared. One day, a cousin sent me a message with a screenshot. Sarah had reactivated her social media after months of silence, but instead of returning with her usual passive-aggressive rants, she had taken a new approach. Now she was posting self-help content. Her page had been completely rebranded into something straight out of a wellness influencer's handbook. Suddenly, she was all about growth, healing, and personal development. She was posting inspirational quotes about moving forward from toxic relationships and learning who truly supports you. Then came the classic vague posts. Family doesn't always have your back. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who hold you back the most. Learning to walk away from negativity was the best decision I ever made. Growth means letting go of the past, even when others won't. She never mentioned names, but everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The family's reaction, lukewarm at best. Most people rolled their eyes and ignored it. They had seen too much to fall for another attempt at rewriting history. But there was one cousin, someone who had originally supported me, who suddenly started liking and commenting on all of Sarah's posts. That raised some eyebrows. A few family members started whispering about whether this cousin was switching sides, or if they had just decided to stay neutral. Then Sarah made her next big move. She posted a long emotional status about rebuilding bridges and forgiving even those who hurt you. She went on about how she had spent the past year reflecting and was now ready to move forward with an open heart. It was obvious what she was doing. She was trying to make herself look like the bigger person. But then, she got exposed. A relative sent me a screenshot of a private message where Sarah admitted she was only posting about forgiveness to make herself look better. Her exact words: "People love a redemption story. If I act like I've moved on, it'll make them feel bad for shutting me out." Once that screenshot started circulating in the family, her whole act fell apart. That's when I got dragged back in. A few family members, ones who had stayed neutral, started reaching out, asking me if I was really unwilling to forgive Sarah. Some of them said things like, "She's clearly trying to move forward, maybe it's time to let this go." I gave them one response: forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone hurt you again. That ended the conversation immediately. Sarah's social media game started failing. People stopped engaging with her posts. The attention she had been hoping for, it never materialized. No one was rushing to praise her for being the bigger person, the cousin who had started liking her posts. They went silent. Meanwhile, the family group chat, the same one Sarah had once used to stir up drama, was stronger than ever. The conversations were light-hearted, positive, and actually fun again. And then Sarah tried one last manipulation attempt. She reached out to my mom. She sent a long message asking her to talk to me for her. She claimed she just wanted to make things right and that I was holding on to a grudge for no reason. For months, my mom had been one of the few people who defended Sarah, constantly pushing for reconciliation. But this time, she finally saw the light. She told me, "You're right, she hasn't changed." That was the moment I knew. Sarah had lost her last supporter, but she wasn't done just yet. A few weeks later, we were having another family gathering, one of the smaller reunions that had now become a tradition. This time, we had booked a private room at a restaurant. Halfway through the evening, Sarah showed up. She wasn't invited. No one had mentioned the event publicly. But somehow she found out. She walked in like she belonged there, smiling like nothing had ever happened. She even greeted a few relatives, acting like it was just another family dinner. No one said anything. No one welcomed her. I didn't acknowledge her at all. She stood there for a minute, waiting for anyone, to pull her into the conversation. No one did. Then, after an awkward silence, she left. She had tried to force her way back in, but it was too late. That was the final shift. After that, Sarah finally stopped trying. No more messages, no more manipulation attempts, no more forgiveness posts. She had finally realized she wasn't coming back from this. And just like that, the family was better off than ever. Just when it seemed like Sarah had finally accepted her exile from the family, she reappeared in the most predictable yet unexpected way possible, with an engagement announcement. Out of nowhere, she posted a long, dramatic caption, alongside a photo of her flashing a ring, holding hands with a man no one in the family had ever met before. Sometimes life takes you on unexpected journeys, but when you finally find the right person, everything just makes sense. I said yes to my forever. The comments section immediately split into two camps. The usual crowd hyping her up. "You deserve this. So happy for you." And the ones who knew better, quietly watching from the sidelines. Some relatives were genuinely happy for her, but many were skeptical. A few started whispering, "Is this real? And she's only been dating this guy for a few months." Then came the wedding drama. Sarah wasted no time demanding that the family set aside the past and come together to celebrate her new beginning. She started sending invitations and reaching out to relatives she hadn't spoken to in over a year, acting as if the family feud never happened. I got an invite too. I ignored it. I had no doubt that this wedding was going to blow up spectacularly, and I had zero interest in being involved. A few weeks later, I started hearing whispers. Apparently, Sarah's fiancé had started asking questions. Through mutual acquaintances, he had caught wind that Sarah's relationship with her family was far from normal. He started casually bringing it up to a few relatives, asking why she didn't talk to certain people, and why there were so many unresolved tensions. And Sarah had mentioned a new boyfriend in passing months earlier, but I hadn't thought much of it. She had never brought him to family gatherings or introduced him formally. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call. "Hey, I know we've never talked, but I'm Sarah's fiancé, and I need to ask you something," he said, his tone cautious. That's when I realized he'd been hearing conflicting stories, and now he was starting to put the pieces together. I didn't badmouth Sarah. I didn't embellish anything. I just laid out the facts. I told him how Sarah had sabotaged the family reunion, how she had spread lies about inheritance, how she had tried to manipulate the entire family, and how she had never once taken responsibility for any of it. There was a long silence. Then he simply said, "That's a lot to process." He thanked me for being honest, and we hung up. A week later, the wedding plans took a drastic turn. Without any explanation, Sarah suddenly canceled everything. No more wedding updates. No more countdown posts. No more enthusiastic bride-to-be energy. Just radio silence. Then people started noticing something even stranger. Sarah's fiancé deleted all their pictures together from his social media. He unfollowed her. The engagement announcement, gone. Within days, it was as if the relationship had never existed. And then Sarah snapped. She started posting cryptic messages about betrayal and men who can't handle a strong woman. "Some people pretend to love you until they see your true power. Never beg someone to see your worth. If they don't get it, walk away like the queen you are. Some people are too weak to handle a real woman." No names, no direct accusations, but everyone knew exactly what had happened. The family's reaction, quiet amusement. No one engaged, no one reached out, but the private group chats. They were on fire. So what happened to forever? Called it. This was always going to crash and burn. This time, no one rushed to comfort her. No one tried to mediate or bring her back into the fold. She had created this chaos for herself, and now she was facing the consequences alone. Meanwhile, my life moved on. The smaller reunions continued. Family events were peaceful, fun, and free of unnecessary drama. There was no tension, no manipulation, just genuine connection. One day, I got a final message. From Sarah. It was just one word. "Sorry." I never responded. That was the perfect ending. Some people never change. Some people will always try to rewrite the past, always try to find a way back in once they realize they've lost control. But the best revenge, it wasn't exposing her. It wasn't making her admit she was wrong. The best revenge was living a great life without her in it.